This is a true survival story. He could hear screaming below the deck. It was past midnight. The ship was supposed to be quiet. It was never supposed to sound like this. Henry Macdonald was on deck when the smell hit him. Smoke, thick and wrong, rising from somewhere deep inside the Cospatrick. He had been a sailor long enough to know what that smell meant. He had been a sailor long enough to know there was nothing he could do to stop what was coming. He had been a sailor long enough to know there was nothing he could do to stop what was coming. 476 people were on that ship. Families, children, people who had sold everything they owned for a ticket to a new life in New Zealand. Only 3 of them would ever see land again. The Cospatrick had left London on October 11, 1874. She was an emigrant ship, a vessel built for carrying people to new lives in distant places. On this voyage, she carried 429 emigrants, most of them bound for Auckland, New Zealand. These were ordinary people, families with children, young men starting over, couples who had saved for years for a ticket. They brought their luggage, their hopes, and everything they owned packed into the space below decks. The ship also carried 47 crew members. Together, that was 476 souls on a single wooden vessel in one of the most remote stretches of ocean in the world. The nearest land was hundreds of miles away. No other ships were in sight. If something went wrong out here, there would be no one to call. For 5 weeks, nothing had gone wrong. Then came the night of November 17th. The fire started in the forward store. The most likely cause was simple and devastating. Someone searching in the dark with an open flame, near materials that should never have been near an open flame. Paint, rope, oakum, alcohol stores. In a wooden ship packed with flammable cargo, fire does not spread slowly. It runs. The fire reached the ship's alcohol stores. Then it reached the paint. The Cospatrick stopped being a ship and became an inferno. Most of the lifeboats were unreachable. The fire blocked access to them. Lines burned through. Boats hung useless over walls of flame. Of all the lifeboats aboard, only 2 were successfully launched. 2 boats for 476 people. People crowded to the edges of the ship. Some jumped into the ocean. The water was cold and the ship was still moving, and most of those who jumped did not survive. Captain Elmsley, the ship's commander, did not make it off the Cospatrick. The chain of command was gone. What remained was chaos and fire, and 2 small boats sitting in the black water, already dangerously full. The Cospatrick burned through the night. At dawn on November 18th, the Cospatrick slipped beneath the surface of the South Atlantic Ocean. She went down quietly, the way burning things do when the fire finally runs out of fuel. And then the ocean was flat and empty, and the smoke was thinning, and there was nothing left of the ship that had carried 476 people from London 6 weeks before. The survivors sat in their overcrowded boats and looked at where the ship had been. There was nothing to say. The ocean had already closed over it. Within the first 2 days, the second lifeboat began to fail. It was damaged, taking on water slowly but surely. The people in it needed to get into the first boat, but the first boat was already dangerously overloaded. Macdonald tried to take stock. There was no food, no fresh water, no compass heading to safety. What followed was desperate and chaotic. People tried to transfer between the 2 boats on open water. The boats rocked and pitched. People fell into the ocean. The first boat nearly capsized more than once. When it was over, more people were gone. The exact number lost in those terrifying minutes would never be fully known. Now all the survivors were in a single lifeboat. Macdonald tried to count. The boat was meant for far fewer. It sat low in the water. Every wave that hit them was a threat. And still, no food, no water, no land in sight. By the 3rd day, the thirst had become the enemy. The ocean surrounded them. Millions of gallons of water in every direction, and every drop of it was poison to drink. Salt water does not hydrate. It pulls the moisture from your body and accelerates your death. Every sailor knew this, but the human body, in enough agony, does not always listen to what the mind knows. Some men drank the seawater. Macdonald watched what happened to them. A man who drank the ocean did not recover. His mind began to go first. Confusion, then agitation, then something that looked like madness. He would rave and thrash and cry out things that made no sense. And then he would go still, and then he would be gone. Macdonald did not drink the seawater. He held on. He did not know exactly why. He told himself, 1 more hour, Just one more hour. Each morning the boat was lighter. The dead had to be moved. There was no way around it. The living needed the space. There was no ceremony, no words spoken over the water, no moment of pause. The dead went over the side and the ocean took them, and the survivors looked away and kept breathing. Macdonald and Cotter held each other steady in those days, not with words necessarily, just with presence, just by being there, still alive, still breathing, still looking at the horizon. The horizon never changed. The ocean stretched in every direction and offered nothing. By the 5th and 6th days, fewer than 10 men remained alive in the boat. The things that happened in those final days, Macdonald would later describe only as beyond description. Some men were delirious. Some were violent. Some had gone somewhere in their minds that no one could reach them. The ocean had taken their water and their hope, and finally, their reason. Macdonald kept his eyes on the horizon. He kept saying to himself, "One more hour." He did not think about the 473 people who were already gone. He could not afford to think about that. He thought only about the next hour. By the 8th day there were 3 men left: Henry Macdonald, Edward Cotter, and Thomas Lewis, an able seaman who was still alive but barely. Lewis was badly burned from the fire. He drifted in and out of consciousness. Macdonald and Cotter kept him in the boat. They did not leave him behind. The lifeboat that had carried dozens of people now held 3. The ocean was the same. The silence was total. Macdonald looked at Cotter. Cotter looked back. Neither of them spoke about what their chances were. There was nothing left to do but wait. On the morning of November 27, 1874, 9 days after the Cospatrick had gone under, Henry Macdonald saw a sail. It was on the horizon, far away. He wasn't certain it was real at first. His eyes had been playing tricks on him for days. But it stayed. It moved. It was a ship. The British vessel Cynthia was passing through those waters by chance. She was not looking for survivors. She did not know the Cospatrick had sunk. She was simply there, in the right place, at the right moment, by the kind of luck that cannot be explained or predicted or earned. Macdonald and Cotter found what was left of their strength and signaled. The Cynthia saw them. The Cynthia turned. When the crew of the Cynthia pulled the 3 men from the lifeboat, they later said that the survivors barely looked alive. They were burned, starved, dehydrated, and broken. But they were breathing. They were there. After 9 days and 473 deaths, 3 men were still in the boat. Thomas Lewis died shortly after being brought aboard the Cynthia. He had held on long enough to be found. He did not hold on long enough to see land. Henry Macdonald and Edward Cotter survived. They gave their testimony. They told the world what had happened to the Cospatrick and to the 473 people who had not made it home. The disaster was reported across Britain and around the world in early 1875. Entire families had been lost, children, people with names and plans and futures, gone. Macdonald carried that weight for the rest of his life. There is no other way to carry it. When you are one of 3 survivors out of 476, the question of why follows you everywhere. The Cospatrick is not a famous story. It does not have the name recognition of other disasters of its era, but it deserves to be remembered, not for the fire, not for the horror of those 9 days on the open water, but for what it tells us about human endurance. Henry Macdonald survived not because the ocean chose him, not because he was stronger or smarter or luckier in any way that can be measured. He survived because every time he reached the end of what he could bear, he gave himself 1 more hour. That was all. 1 more hour, and then 1 more. The 473 who did not come back were not weaker. They were family. They were children. They were people with tickets to a new life who never got to use them. They deserved better than what the ocean gave them. We cannot give them that. But we can say their story. We can remember that they were real. The ocean does not remember. That is our job. Hold on 1 more hour. That is all survival has ever asked of anyone.